Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Kapsch TechTalk, the new tech podcast hosted by Kapsch TrafficCom. My name is Cornelia Ertl, and over the next few months, we will regularly be talking about topics related to technology and innovation. Today, we'll be talking about congestion and its ecological footprint. First of all, I would like to welcome the CTO of Kapsch, Alfredo Escriba.
Thank you very much, Connie. Pleasure to be on this podcast. I'm Kapsch CTO. I've been working on the transportation sector my whole career. I'm really passionate about the topic that we have today because this is the mission that I consider that we have in life, not only in our company, that I consider personally. I work mainly on the technology portion of transportation, from traffic to tolling. So this topic is really spot on what I live for.
And of course, I want to welcome the guest for today's episode. He's a former member of the European Parliament and transport analyst. Welcome, Mark Watts.
Well, thank you very much, Connie. It's a real pleasure and indeed an honor to be on this chat with Kapsch. Very much looking forward to discussing these challenging issues with you and Alfredo. As you say, I was a member of the European Parliament for 10 years, specializing in transport policy, and I now provide transport advice to public and private sector organizations. And it's really crunch time for transport because with the Green Deal being implemented this year across Europe, transport has got to start delivering serious policy change and improvements to. We'll come on to this, I'm sure, in your discussion, but it's a very exciting time to have this conversation.
We will, definitely. Thank you very much for your participation, both of you, of course. Thanks for joining in today's very first podcast episode. That's, of course, very exciting for us as well. Let's move to the first question. Road congestion is the top negative aspect of today's traffic in city centers. According to surveys conducted, people are really suffering from congestion. What can be done about this? Alfredo, maybe you want to start.
Congestion happens when demand and capacity do not match, right? So you have certain capacity, and then you have more demand, which means you have more people, more vehicles trying to travel at the same time on the same piece of road. And on that aspect, obviously what we have today is more vehicles that are trying to get on the road at the same time. So there are things that can be done, absolutely. There are many things that can be done, and the lines of action should be in terms of capacity. On the one side, improving the capacity. That doesn't mean building new capacity, which in many cases is impossible, but optimizing the use of that capacity. There's technology that can enable that. And the other important aspect that can be done is managing the demand. I would say that until now, in transportation, I think that all of us, the ecosystem, we have not done a good job in managing demand. We have very much focused on improving capacity, but not articulating how we can accommodate that to what is available. So there's many things that really can be done that probably we can expand later on some of during the podcast.
So I think we can agree on it's a huge challenge we're talking about. Mark, is there anything you want to add? Alfredo already used the word optimizing. Of course, there's a lot to optimize here. What's your opinion? What can be done about this?
Well, I think we need a real system change here. And I think Alfredo's already touched on that we must get much better at optimizing the existing capacity we have. It's incredibly inefficient. I mean, congestion is a sign of failure, policy failure, traffic management failure, city failure. I mean, it's no wonder most Europeans think it's one of the biggest problems that they face every day of our lives. We sit in traffic jams, not just for minutes, but in some cases for hours. I mean, what a waste of time, energy, and money, and the impact, of course, will come onto this, the environment. So we need a whole system change for society to basically say we must rid ourselves of this unnecessary burden on our lives. The other thing I would say to add on to Alfredo is I think we're very keen at looking at it from a Brussels European perspective to see complementary measures alongside traffic management and optimizing the system. So we need to promote collective transport more. They should be integrated into these systems. So buses, trams, metro, they should be as sophisticated as modern technology can provide. They shouldn't be a second-class option. They should be a first-class option. And the second thing I think we need to find more focus on, particularly after COVID, as we emerge from COVID, is active travel mode. So encourage more cycling and walking in particular. And all that system needs to be integrated so our cities can breathe again, they can live again and be wonderful places to work and to shop and indeed to live. You know, this is a very exciting opportunity for us, but you know, at the moment we're going in the wrong direction. So this is the year we have to make that real dramatic change in policy.
There are a number of negative aspects of road congestion, such as delays, increasing air pollution, health problems, just to name a few. Cities in Europe, the US, and Latin America have started several initiatives to combat congestion. What have they done? Can you maybe give us some examples?
Yeah, I think there are. Let me put it this way. I think that there are some things that have been done. What keeps me a little bit optimistic is that I see that there are many cities that are now really starting to tackle some of these things. So probably we can talk not only of what has happened already, but also what different cities are planning to do. So for instance, when you look into Europe, which has been always compared to the US, much more about public transport, that is something that obviously in Europe has worked pretty well. I think there are cities as well that are promoting now more the e-mobility. I mean, during this pandemic time, you have seen the growth in many places and the importance that, for instance, bicycles have been promoted in many cities. I think that definitely that is the right way to go. We can see as well in Europe different initiatives popping up in many different places. At least there is some interest on starting to set some cleaner zones that will restrict the access to downtown. However, that cannot be the only measure, right? Because you might restrict the access, but if you don't complement that to some of the things that Mark was mentioning before, like making public transport more accessible to everybody and providing the quality and the convenience, it will fail. You will simply move the problem to other part of the city, right? In the US, some of the other things that have been done, which again, the way of people moving and the layout of the cities is a little bit different, have gone more into the US still is building capacity in many cases and trying to optimize capacity. Some of the things that are happening in many places in the US are associated to some early stages of demand management using, for instance, dynamic pricing in managed lanes, where you try to couple the price with the level of congestion and try to mitigate and disincentivize people to use the road at any given time. And I think that is working pretty well. Again, I would say still in early stages because I think it can be more ambitious. And then you have as well other examples in places in Latin America. For instance, the city of Buenos Aires took a very mixed of infrastructure and technology approach, which I think is very interesting to look into. They heavily promoted the use of bicycles. So they built kilometers and kilometers of bicycle lanes that are heavily being used in the city. So I would consider that a big success. And at the same time, they took a technological approach, very data-centric, really knowing what was happening in the city, sharing information with users, etc. So probably it's a good example as well to follow.
Mark, Alfredo has mentioned several examples already. Do you have any additional use cases for us?
Well, I think I definitely agree with Alfredo, and I think the lesson we've learned now after sort of 10 or 20 years of building on some of the early traffic management schemes, early charging schemes, including, for example, one in the city I'm from, London, which has been a very successful charging scheme, that these schemes can make a big and positive impact, particularly if they're applied, as Alfredo said, in a holistic way. So we involve the whole city. We don't exclude people that will use public transport. I'm very passionate about people with reduced mobilities to make sure everyone can benefit from these measures rather than being a disadvantage. But we've tried the voluntary route, the softly route. We're waiting for cities to sign up for these measures, and I'm afraid they haven't. There are some exceptions that Fredo mentioned. I would argue they're exceptions rather than the rule. And the result has been most cities haven't done enough fast enough so that they are more congested. We already touched that. But like the other concern I have is CO2 emissions. We're all worried about CO2 emissions. Since 1990, they've increased across Europe at least by 30%. CO2 emissions for transport, whilst every other sector has cut emissions by 30%. So we're going backwards, not forward. So I think my view is the time has come for the EU and maybe global regulators, and we have a new administration in the US, to at least set best practice targets, if not mandatory requirements. That I think it would help cities if we had a regulatory framework within which we could operate. I mean, no one wants to tell a city what to do, but it's not the way we're currently running our policy is not working.
Alfredo, in your opinion, what are the main levers to pull to change the negative impact of congestion? Are there, for example, investment in public transport, investment in e-mobility, investment in digital traffic management tools? A few of them already have been mentioned, but maybe there are a few more that come to mind.
Well, as I said at the beginning, for me, it's all of the above. I don't think that in any place there is one single magic bullet that will solve it all. It's kind of what we were saying with congestion charging. You can implement or cleaner zones, you can implement that, but if you don't improve the public transit, if you don't create the options for the people that now you are asking not to use their private vehicle, it will not work. So you need to create kind of a holistic view, a holistic plan of different measures. I think that also when we implement some of these things, it is very important to talk about equity redistribution, right? Because you cannot charge people that cannot pay for transportation. So that is something very important, and the redistribution of what you collect on one place and put it on the other place. So it's a whole set of policies. I think that any given city that really is serious about implementing this needs to take this holistic approach. And it's a combination of public transit, it's a combination of implemented technology for traffic management. I mean, I still can give many examples of many places where even the traffic lights coordination is so poor. That is very simple to be solved, and technology is available today. You can do a much better job. We have been experimenting with things like disseminating a recommended speed while you drive in arterials where you have traffic lights. It is demonstrated that you can reduce emissions 20% if people follow your recommendation. That is no cost. That again, the cost of that is neglectable, right? So yes, combination of infrastructure, combination of outreach, promoting e-mobility, facilitating private companies to be able to build those businesses around, and a combination of technology. There is one other point that on all this context as well of congestion, it goes a little bit more on the urban planning kind of thinking, which is the accessibility. I think that the other thing that needs to be done in the context of cities is bringing the services closer to where the citizens are. If we continue creating and building the services, all of them concentrating in downtown, the problem will become more and more difficult because cities are going to continue growing. So this is the other aspect that I would add to what you were saying. on the different options is accessibility, bringing the services, the hospitals, schools, the companies, where the enterprises are, etc., closer to where people is living.
Of course, it's also very difficult to compare traffic standards one to another, so different countries to another. Mark, what are the main levers you want to add?
Well, I think building on what Alfredo says, he used the term a holistic approach, and I think that's exactly the right approach. We need to use all the tools in the toolbox to try and address these problems, and there are a whole range of them. But I think in the past, perhaps, for example, Alfredo gave that figure that, using existing technology, we could already reduce congestion by 20%, pretty much at a stroke, by improvising traffic management, including, you mentioned traffic lights, but, your whole citywide or route-wide measures can reduce congestion by 20%. So why aren't we doing that everywhere? And I think, in my days when I was an MEP, if only we knew this, we do now, but in my day, I think there wasn't enough awareness of the benefits of traffic management. We would have seized on it, and I think probably regulated on it. There was an obligation for cities to have citywide plans, and those plans need to include traffic management measures, and they need to consult with their citizens on that and start implementing those measures. I mean, now that's happening anyway. The European Commission has published what they call the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy. It's going to go through the legislative process. Different tools will be used to implement it, including, I mentioned before, 100 cities across Europe with zero emissions by 2030. So cities are going to, I think many cities will now want to leap at the opportunities. And they're going to have to take different measures. So it's going to be a mixture of best practice, a mixture of regulation, a mixture of citizens themselves demanding change. But the two other points I want to add, because I think this is the only way that we can achieve all this. However optimistic I am, we can't ignore those two issues that Alfredo mentioned. I mean, one is services. We need to maintain accessibility. We can't make accessibility difficult for people, particularly with people with reduced mobilities. We can't use traffic management to exclude people. The other one he mentioned was pricing. We do want pricing to better reflect the cost, but not to disadvantage some of the poorest in the community. So, for example, the rural people from poorer areas who maybe have no alternative to driving in. We know we've made mistakes in the past by burdening them with price, and that's alienating a lot of people from rural areas. We need to take them with us. So again, we need a holistic solution. It's not easy, but some of these global challenges are never easy, but they're not impossible either.
Moving to the last question of today's episode. Do you have any advice for cities that are thinking of implementing congestion initiatives?
I would probably give the following message. The first one is, please do it. Go for it. It takes courage and it takes leadership. And that is what is expected, right? On the one side. Second, take this holistic approach. I think is key to make it successful, which includes, as we were discussing as well, the social impact and how you will redistribute equity, which is super important in everything that we talk about transportation. And the third one is make sure that you make funding available. I think this is very important, which is a point that we did not touch until now. And especially when you talk with smaller cities, big cities is relatively easier, right? They have the funding, they move a lot of money. But when you start talking about mid-sized cities that depend in some cases, for instance, in the US, from federal funding, I think you need to create the mechanisms to secure the funding and make it available to be properly spent in these initiatives.
Mark, may I pass the question on to you? What would be your advice?
I quite like the European Union's plan that we should actually say to cities, come on, we're all in this together. Everyone adopts a sustainable urban mobility plan by 2030. How are you going to reduce your emissions? In some cases, over 100, expecting to go net zero by 2030. I think a plan would focus their minds, particularly if we do it all together, because it would, I think, ensure best practice was disseminated and shared. Will be leadership at a European level and city level. We will involve the citizens in those active travel plans across the cities, looking at all the tools and options we've talked about, including traffic management, but better public transport, better facilities for cycling and walking. So I think that's the very simple thing we could do. Throw down the gauntlet, set the challenge for cities. Everyone needs to complete sustainable urban travel plans by 2030. And then, as Alfredo says, let's not be unrealistic. They're going to need money to then implement these plans. But I think that's where we just have to have that conversation with the public. Not doing anything is costing more. I mean, that's the truth. That's the reality. That's the irony. If we do nothing for the next 10 years, the bill is going to be enormous. It has been for the last 10 years. So we need a way of creating that new financial reality, that people realize the cost of congestion, the cost of pollution, the cost of CO2 emissions, and start factoring that in the amount we invest in cities. When I've been involved in transport for a long time, and transport is normally at the bottom of the pile when it comes to federal funding in the US or in the EU. That's wrong, absolutely wrong. That's got to change. Priority must be given to some of the most pressing issues in our in society, and we heard earlier, top of the list for many people is congestion. So it needs to be given more financial priority by those that control the public purse. So that would be my view, that create the plans, create the expectation that we'll deliver them, and then the pressure will be on public authorities to fund them in a way that within 10 years would more than pay for itself.
Thank you very much, Mark Watts, for your input, for your opinion, and of course your participation. Also a big thank you to the CTO of Kapsch, Alfredo Escriba. And of course, thank you very much to all the listeners to today's very first episode of Kapsch Tech Talk. You can find Alfredo Escriba and our guest of today's episode, Mark Watts, on LinkedIn if you want to stay in touch. My name is Cornelia Ertl. Thank you very much again, and stay tuned for our next episode of the Kapsch Tech Talk.